Here's another equation of a radical function that involves the variables r and n. We have r equals the square root of 2n minus 6. Let's go after the domain of this function. The idea here is we're concerned with only the values that make this expression underneath the square root 0 or positive. So we can set up this inequality, negative 2n minus 6 is greater than or equal to 0 to help us find the domain. It's these values, the n values that make this expression bigger than or equal to 0 is our domain. So we can solve this inequality simply by adding 6 to both sides. And so here we get negative 2n is greater than or equal to 6. Remember and recall that when you divide by a negative number on both sides of an inequality, the inequality must flip. And I'll show you about that in class, or maybe you're watching this after you are remembering this. So again, when you divide by a negative number, an inequality on both sides, you got to flip that inequality. So this is the domain here, all real numbers n such that those numbers are less than or equal to negative 3. So you could write it this way. So those n values right there are our domain. So on our graph, we expect to see that our graph starts along this input axis here at negative 3 and start there, and then the picture of the graph is only to the left of that negative 3 and that negative 3 as well. Alright, so let's go look at the graph here using our calculator. X represents the input, Y the output. So let's plug that in there. Negative 2x minus 6. Let's look at the graph on a standard window. Notice where it starts along the input axis going left. It starts at negative 3. So it looks something like this and goes up. Let's go after the vertical intercept. It's where the graph of this crosses that axis. Well, it doesn't cross that axis, so immediately we can say there is no vertical intercept. Had we not recognized this graph, we would have replaced our input variable with 0 and tried to solve. If that was the case, or doing that, we'd get this. So we get r is equal to, that's a 0 minus 6 or negative 6, a square root of negative 6. So square root of negative 6 is not a real number, it's an imaginary number. So there is no value along here, right? This is an imaginary number. So that's some proof that when you input your input variable with 0, you're going to get an output that's not a real number. So it doesn't cross that real axis there. So we'll say none, right? There is none. What about the horizontal intercept? Well, that occurs where this graph crosses that axis, and the idea here is to replace your output with 0 and then find the input that gets you to that point. So the horizontal can be found by replacing this with 0. So we know the second coordinate is 0. Alright, so we have to solve this now for our n, our corresponding n value. So square both sides. Recognize that when you do that, you get 0 on the left. That squaring undoes the square root. And we can solve that for our n. So we get 6 equals negative 2 times n. So I'm dividing both sides by negative 2, which gives me n equals negative 3. So I'll show that to you. N equals negative 3. And so our horizontal intercept is negative 3, comma 0. That's the coordinates of that point right there.